in the midst of the difficulties of being an NPE, there's great beauty. My discovery has given me, as you mentioned, a deep and beautiful relationship with my family.
Welcome to DNA Clarity and Support. I'm your host, Brian. Listen as I chat with authors and leaders in the DNA world about the family and personal impacts of DNA testing. You'll hear news stories, unique perspectives, find out about books, websites, organizations, other podcasts for those involved in the world of DNA. Please be sensitive to younger listeners as the conversations can get intense at times. This is a production of Watershed DNA. Learn more at watersheddna.com. Maggie Chenard made a not parent-expected discovery in 2019 from a DNA test gifted to her by family. The discovery changed her sense of self, ethnic identity, and connection to others. Maggie is the Mindful NPE on Instagram and Twitter and hosts a secret Facebook group of the same name. Today, she helps us understand her experience, how grief changes with time, relationships, and what it took to help those around her learn to support her during her discovery, now, and going forward. How lucky I feel to have Maggie join today to kick off the DNA Clarity and Support podcast. I hope she'll be a frequent visitor, and I think you will too. Welcome, Maggie. I'm so excited to be talking with you today.
Well, thank you, Brianne. Thank you. I'm excited too. Thank you so much for having me.
I can't remember how we first came across one another, but I know it has to do something with the topic of NPE, or not parent-expected discoveries. And how long has it been since you made your discovery?
Actually, just 18 months, so a year and a half. It was July 12th of 2019 when my kids for Mother's Day had given me an Ancestry DNA kit. It was a fun and loving gift from them, and I very innocently took it, really without any expectations. And then I kind of just put it out of my mind and didn't think much about it for a little while. You know, it was all entertainment. Yeah.
So was it a gift, like a holiday gift or a birthday gift, or was it just something that they decided they wanted to give you?
It was a Mother's Day gift. So it was, it was kind of fun. Their dad and I are not together, but they gave him one as well for Father's Day. So it was pretty sweet.
So 18 months, it probably feels in some ways like that was a really long time ago, because how different your life is now, I imagine. But in other ways, maybe that wasn't very long ago. How does that feel to you?
Well, it does now at this point feel like quite some time ago. It feels, well, in some ways, and the deepness of it can be as fresh as a daisy. The deep feelings of it can be super fresh, a couple of times a month still to me. So in that way, it still feels pretty new. But in another way, 18 months ago, it had really taken over my life. So there weren't too many moments that it didn't consume. So in many ways, I found lots of ways to help myself blend it in with the rest of my life in some ways. And in some ways, I will just keep on blending forever,
Yeah, that does make a lot of sense, the way you describe that. And I've heard of your background and your story because you've been a guest on a couple of other podcasts, including Patient Stories with Eleanor Griffith. And so we won't go into too many details on your personal discovery, but people who do want to kind of get all of those details, I'll put the link to those podcasts down in the show notes. So could you tell us a little bit about what it felt like physically and psychologically when you first realized that your DNA test was not really what you were expecting it would be?
As I mentioned, I didn't really think much about it again until I was waiting for my husband at the bar at a restaurant on a Friday night around 6:00. And all of a sudden, a text came through that said your ancestry results are ready. And I genuinely didn't have a moment's thought or fear about it. And yet, even though I wasn't like nervous or suspicious or anything like that, I stopped and for some reason did a grounding meditation. So I'm a person who enjoys mindfulness and meditation, but I don't generally do it at the bar in a restaurant. But I did. I stopped and I did 5 things you can see, and 4 things you can feel, and 3 things you can hear, and 2 things you can smell, and 1 thing you can taste. And right then I clicked in, and the first thing that I saw was that I was 50% Ashkenazi Jewish, which was completely brand new news to me, as I believed my whole life that I was about 90% Irish, maybe 10% English. So I was like, this is so confusing. This is so strange. This must be a mistake. It's got to be a mistake. And then the next odd thing that I saw is amongst other family members that I did know, my sister was there, my niece, a couple of aunts and uncles. I also noticed a name that I'd never heard before. And this person had as many centimorgans or more centimorgans in common with me than my nieces, and almost as much as my siblings. And
so there you were in the middle of the restaurant. And
in the restaurant.
This was on your phone. Was your husband there yet? Or were you?
No, I got a little freaked out and I ran into the restroom there and called Ancestry. And, basically just was trying to find out how accurate this could possibly be. I hung up with them after they said there's, a very high likelihood. I was pretty much freaking out, and I felt very, very much in a panic. When I came out, my husband was there, and panic began all over again.
And the panic you described, was it like your heart was racing? You were shaking? What did that look like for you?
I was so hot. I know my face was super hot. I could barely talk. I could barely breathe. I could tell as my husband looked at me, that I looked very upset, and he came over and kind of settled me down in the chair. And the feeling that I felt, I would call it it. I felt it. And that it is a huge, punch in the gut, kick in the gut that happens. And it still happens to me today, just not as much. But that feeling began then and really hasn't gone away. And once that pain stops for a minute, for me, I go into a feeling of feeling somewhat ungrounded, separate, untethered. It's a very frightening feeling. And I assume it has to do with, kind of rediscovering your identity. All of the memories that you thought had happened are now discolored or now changed in some way.
I've heard other NPEs describe a similar physical reaction, almost like shock. And it's a little bit different for everybody what exactly that looks like. Some have described the first thing when they wake up in the morning that they think about is the discovery, and that's the last thing they think about before they go to bed. For some people, there's a lot of crying that just comes out at unexpected times. In a lot of ways, it sounds just like grief that you might experience if you've lost a loved one. Does this compare to other types of grief you've experienced in your life?
That is spot on. Absolutely. And in some ways, I feel like some of grieving that I've done in the past, the loss of my parents, a divorce, the loss of a pet or a good friend, has prepared me in some way for some of this. And that is what it feels like. I found myself at different times Googling, looking for the stages of grief and, wondering, where am I at this point? And I think much like deep grief that I've felt in the past, it does lessen a bit over time. So time is a healer, but it never, with deep, deep grief, I don't think it will ever go away. So I would definitely liken it to that. And that, that feeling just after a deep loss when it feels like the wind is blowing through you, and you're so tender, so vulnerable. And in some ways, it's in every way, people understand when you lose a loved one, that you might feel that way. And actually, sadly, you still only get X amount of time as far as society is about grief, of how long you should feel that pain or what have you. But I don't think anybody knows much about the pain of this at this time, or why someone might feel this kind of deep pain, or even quite how to describe it. We're just beginning to describe it.
I think you're spot on that we are just starting to understand what does this NPE discovery that one or both of your parents are not who you thought they were genetically, that there is an aspect of grief and shock and loss and identity crisis, which I've heard some people also use the term identity disruption.
Yes.
That unless you've been through that experience, it's impossible to fully appreciate and understand what that being untethered is like. And I've not been through an NPE discovery myself. I became interested in genetic genealogy because one of my grandparents was a kinship adoptee. And so I started to understand this from the aspect of, family of an adoptee and what that is like to not have complete connection to all of the people out there in the world that are genetically related to you as family. As time went on and I started to hear each story is unique, but there's so much in common between all of them. And that's true whether you're talking to people who have an NPE discovery about themselves, or if you're talking to the bio dads who discover they had a child out there that they weren't aware existed. And it's true for their wives and even the half siblings or the full siblings that after a DNA test, they became half siblings and how that affects their lives as well. So we know that one discovery can have ripple effects through an entire family. But for the NPE who's at the middle of that, just have your identity be something that you took for granted. And now you have to rebuild that and not rebuild it to the same thing, but to something different.
Yeah. That's what's happening every day.
And in your interview with Eleanor Griffith on the Patient Stories podcast, a point you made really struck me, and it was something you talked about that I had never heard anyone talk about before, which is that you sometimes have to tell other people how to help you. If they haven't been through the same experience you are, and you're really counting on them for support, to expect them to naturally know how to support you it doesn't work that way. And so tell me what you did to help the people around you help you through this time.
Well, as it was, of course, folks closest to me, starting with my husband, my adult children, and my siblings, who are all very close, supportive people to me, and my very closest friends. So these are all people who, spent a lifetime knowing how to support me in many things. We know how to love each other, if you will. When I started with the first couple of folks, and the experience left me feeling very empty. And I don't want to say worse, because these very loving people were doing the best they could, but it actually raised the pain a bit. And this be. And so I tried to look at it from a very simplistic standpoint, because I knew that I needed to express this and make these people aware of what was going on. And I knew this because I tried to go several days, a week and a half without telling people. And it was too much for me. It was much too much for me.
So holding it in was toxic for you.
It was toxic. It was impossible. It went from all of those kind of frightening words of untethered, ungrounded, into really dark ideas of, what's happening in my brain here. So it got a little scary, and I knew I needed to connect with other humans. And of course, the ones who were closest to me, who, again, have a lifetime of knowing how to love me. They weren't able to do it. So what I did with the next person that I told is, and again, just as you said, is because this is kind of a new event in the relationship world. And we might have to tell people just what to do. So I would say something like this. I'd make sure that it was a quiet time or a time that they knew that we needed to chat. And I might say something like, I have something deep, important, and very serious to share with you. It's not a medical issue, but would you just listen to what I have to say and really resist all your urges to say anything at all to help me feel better? And I'd wait for an answer. And, it took some people, that's an odd request. So it took some people a few minutes, and then they would provide it. And then we could all sit there and just kind of listen to what's happened without any invalidating statements. Invalidating statements, they're the same types of unhelpful, inaccurate words that people use, when there are losses. They're not really helpful, but they're what we've learned socially and culturally to say. So sorry for your loss. And in the NPE world, someone might say, well, you're still who you are, or, your dad is still your dad. And, there's these really, people try to make you feel better, but the very best thing anybody could do would be to just listen. Just listen.
Just listen. It's really hard to do, but it's the most important thing that you can do.
It's a super loving gift. I might even say, I need you to give me a gift, depending on who the person was, because it really is hard for some people. I didn't necessarily I don't know what I expected, but I thought that's not the hardest thing in the world to ask from someone. And it's frankly exactly what I needed. Yeah.
It's like a kind of grief that we talked a little bit about this before we started our call today, that there's a type of grief called disenfranchised grief. And that's when you have suffered a loss that society or the people around you don't really recognize as a loss. They don't understand why it would be so upsetting to you to discover that your DNA does not connect you to the father you always knew. And there's no way to formally acknowledge that a loss has happened. There is not a funeral. There's not an obituary in the newspaper. There's really not a recognition publicly. And that can be really healing for people who are experiencing grief, is to have that loss acknowledged openly.
Yeah. Wow. Disenfranchised grief. So yeah, that just about nails it, and why it feels so unsafe and confusing. It is because people just don't know, and they will over time. Maybe you and I can help a little bit with that.
Tell me the story about your siblings coming together and holding space for you after you had begun to tell your siblings about your discovery.
This is by far just one of the most amazing and healing things that any family could ever do. I've been very blessed with amazing parents, amazing siblings. We were always close. But I don't mind saying, as I did earlier, that it was difficult telling each one, because each person, again, was unsure of what was really going on here. And not only that, they had their own stories, their own grief, their own memories, their parents too. And, their own ideas of, oh, do I remember this? And, oh, wow, now that makes more sense. And so as I spoke with each person, everyone shared their stories with me, and it was good to talk. But I can't say that there was much healing. It was more of a sharing of information, and it didn't feel all that great. Although they were super loving and super wonderful, and everybody did the best they could. And one day, over time, maybe a month or two after my discovery, and they all knew. I came home from work on a Monday, and in my backyard were all my brothers and sisters. And I was so confused. I was like, oh my goodness, what is going on here? So I walked in the backyard and they're all standing there. And my husband was there, sitting there rather. My husband was there as well. And I was like, okay, guys, what's going on here? And so one of my sisters spoke and said, well, when you shared everything about your discovery with us, each one of us had their own things to say and felt it in their own way. And you were so lovely to listen to all of us. But today we're just here just to be here with you. They were there just to be quiet. And we could talk as much as I wanted to talk, but this gathering was just for me. They were there simply to hold space. And it was the loveliest thing I think anyone's ever done for me. And all of the validation in the world existed on that veranda that day. And they brought about many extra special things besides the space that they were holding. They brought beautiful food and drink and flowers and desserts. And nothing was about anybody but me. And for those who I'm saying, okay, what is this whole space thing? There are lots of definitions, but my very favorite, and I'm just going to read this if that's okay, because I just love this. It's from palliative care. And they define holding space as a willingness to walk alongside of another person in whatever journey they're on without judging them, making them feel inadequate, or trying to fix or sunny side the situation, or trying to impact the outcome. Like, whoa, what a gift. Whoa. It's so beautiful, so that's.
So out of your pain came this beautiful gathering of your family that would not have happened otherwise.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I do feel that everybody grew a lot in those few months, for sure.
So do you remember the first time you came across the term NPE? Because that's now a part of your social media handle, the Mindful NPE. So how did you become familiar with that term? And is it something that you feel is a part of your identity now?
I do. I specifically remember coming across it. So it was a little bit, after I had discovered just what had happened and who Bio Dad was. And so I started Googling, as a lot of people will, and came across this term. And, there's the NPE, I think in genetics might have been a non-paternal event. I relate more to it as not parent expected. And I related to that for a very long time. I still do. And, I noticed, so when DNA discovery, DNA surprises, and DNA NPE, when you Google these, I was surprised to see that the same things kind of pop up now as they did then. And, it's a few kind of stories over the past couple of years that some talk shows or newspapers have run and things like that. So the non-parent expected, I would say that, yes, it is part of my identity, in as much as feeling Irish or feeling Jewish or feeling, or being a college grad or a wife or a mother. I would say, yes, I'm an NPE as well. Work hard every day not to attach too much to any identity or parts of my ego. That's just part of my, work that I do. But yes, it's definitely now in my arsenal of the things I consider parts of my identity. Is this really cool quote by Lao Tzu, and it's a Chinese philosopher, and he wrote the Tao. And he says, when I let go of what I am, I become what I might be. And long before this revelation, this DNA revelation, that's one of the things I work on for myself. So this fit in nicely with the work.
So something that I've noticed you've done with your engagement on social media, interacting with other people and being the mindful NPE, is that you've taken your natural powers of empathy, which that's not something that everybody has. And you've taken those powers and funneled them in a way that helps others heal. So tell me about how you knew that was the way you needed to take your story and what resources you came across early on that you found helpful for becoming an NPE yourself.
You're very kind, truly. So mindfulness is just the most amazing tool to me. And in a nutshell, it allows me to notice emotional and physical feelings and to separate them from what's going on. And just that noticing can create a pause or a moment that allows me to make wise decisions. I work on that all the time, and it's such a beautiful tool, and it's so accessible, and it allows me to see things as they are. And in the spirit of gratitude, it also helps me remember so many lovely things about the life that I do live. You know, in the midst of the difficulties of being an NPE, there's great beauty. You know, my discovery has given me, as you mentioned, a deep and beautiful relationship with my family. It's given me a deepened relationship with myself. I have a new family, a new relationship with the new niece and nephew who are awesome. And I would say, Fran, that it has definitely cultivated, you know, my compassion and empathy and love for each member of this journey. I feel very connected to you in that way. And I feel it is a unique and special thing to be able to acknowledge everyone in this experience. And, you know, we are all human and we all suffer. So, you know, I trust myself more every day, which is amazing.
So in the very beginning of your discovery, do you think you could have ever seen where it would take you in terms of being able to find silver linings in the midst of all that pain?
Oh, yeah, it's like light years of difference between bewilderment, fright, and pain into, you know, some grounding, some giving and acceptance and time. And, you know, in the beginning, the place that was helpful for me was one of the first groups that kind of pops up when you Google, and it's called NPE Friends. Many different breakdowns of it. It's a nice structured place to begin where you can begin to understand this whole world. It's like an entry to an entire world.
Right. Because it's not just the discovery of your paternity sometimes. It can also be a discovery of a new ethnic background, or you become part of a large group of half-sibs, and maybe before that you were an only child. And so there's lots of different type subgroups, correct? So there's,
Absolutely.
You know, NPE is a very big umbrella term that includes a lot of different parentage discoveries. And within it, there are many different subgroups, I guess you could.
For sure. And folks who, you know, it made me aware, how mine came about was different than, there's so many different ways they come about. And there's, folks who were adoptees, folks who were donor conceived, and many, many other aspects of how you could come to learn that you're the parent that had raised you and not your biological parents. Now, there's a great awareness through that. And then I think that I'm not sure, to be honest, how I began finding other places of support. But when I did kind of jump off that first tier, I really found my people. I really found my tribe. And they are, what's so special about so many of these groups is that they're all super kind, abundantly uplifting, both, to almost anything you might have to say or wonder or be curious about. And they're super generous with collaboration. And that felt so good to me. And it felt like something I wanted to be more, very much a part of, like yourself.
I've seen things change so much since I first started Watershed DNA, which was 2016. And back then, there were no support groups. There was no NPE Friends Fellowship. I had started my own small private Facebook support group for clients and a friend of mine that were all having the same experience. But other than that, there really wasn't anything else. And it took a number of years before other groups started to pop up. And it seems like it's been a grassroots movement, from the bottom up. It's the people who have either found out from another person or from a DNA test, and they've taken it upon themselves to use what was really a painful experience for them and use that to help other people. And so now there's a collective of other Facebook groups. There's podcasts that are forming. This is not one of the first by any stretch on this topic. It really helps me to be able to do my job better, to let people know you're definitely not alone. And there are many sites and groups out there now. It was not like that in 2016. Right. It's been really wonderful.
Yeah, it is good. Lots of places for validation and support. Yeah, even different than 18 months ago. I'll say that for sure.
Yeah. In the show notes, I'm going to put a link to the tab on my website, which lists all of the different groups involved in the collective. It includes Severance Mag or Severance Magazine and the Right to Know organization and a bunch of others who have come together to try to get greater recognition, starting at the DNA companies themselves, of the different resources available out there. It has been great to be a part of that and to contribute my own perspective. I've told other people before that if I'm not sure I could be doing the work that I do if I had been involved in an NPE discovery personally, because of how painful and traumatic that can be. I feel like I've been able to be a bit more removed, and it allows me to hear the stories of the bio family and the birth parents and the NPE or adoptee or donor conceived person, and notice the themes and the comments that they make and pull those connections together. It can be really hard for an NPE, for example, to not understand why their biological father maybe is not open to communicating with them, or a half sibling that didn't know they existed is refusing to answer an email or a phone call. In some cases, had said really hurtful things to a person who had no say at all in their conception. And understanding where all of those reactions and words come from, it takes time and it takes listening, and it's really hard to do.
That's for sure. That's for sure. And it's true. Each, a large portion, I'm guessing, of, the reactions that don't feel great to us are likely from others, fear and pain and their own suffering, So I created the Mindful NPE, both for others and for myself. I found a lot of love and support out there, but I also found a lot of defensiveness. And I wanted to make my place just a place to gather in love and kindness and compassion. And that's not to say we're not looking at the hard stuff and we're not looking at the facts and acknowledging the pain. We certainly are. My inspiration, I'll call it, is although our past has been unexpectedly redefined, we can find our truth in the here and now. And that, the here and now, is about mindfulness. And there's lots of definitions of mindfulness. But I go with Jon Kabat-Zinn's, which is, mindfulness is paying attention on purpose in a particular way, in the present moment, non-judgmentally. And in doing this, it can help you, again, put that little moment of space in between how you're feeling and how you might react. And it can totally help ground you. Like, this is a practice that a lot of folks, you can grow it or grow that exercise, if you will, or grow that muscle by meditating. But even if you don't meditate, you can do this practice like in your ordinary day. So for instance, if you go to pour your glass of water tomorrow morning, I might suggest that you start by listening to the squeak of the cabinet door as it opens. And then as you go to touch the glass, you can, feel the coolness of the glass on your warm hand. Then as you watch the water go into the glass, watch how it pools and bubbles. And the whole time, if your mind gets distracted, just bringing it back to the water, filling the glass. Yep, the whole entire time. Yeah. And once you're doing that, you're practicing mindfulness. And so that's the magic. That's the secret. And people are like, that's it. Yeah, that's it. And as you practice this, you begin getting those magic powers.
So the past is gone. The future doesn't exist.
Mm-hmm.
So what we have is today, and not just today. We only have this moment in front of us right now.
Indeed. Indeed, my friend.
Thank you so much. I really appreciated you giving us your grounding exercise. I feel like that's something that listeners can take away and do. I think that's really powerful. Your story has been very touching in many different ways and on many different levels. And I look forward to a time in the future when I can have you back on and we'll talk a little bit about the medical aspects of your NPE, because I know that was a part of your story you've talked about in some other places. And if you'll come back, I would love to have you again.
I'd be honored. Thank you so much. I would like that very much. And really, Brian, thank you for helping me and allowing me to feel the enormity of all of this right here with you today. Thank you.
Thank you, Maggie.
Thanks for listening to today's episode of DNA Clarity and Support podcast. Head on over to watersheddDNA.com to learn more about the resources and support available for those involved in DNA discoveries. On our next episode, we'll be speaking with Mary Beth Sammons, author of Ancestry Quest. Looking forward to it.